we walk in to that first gig. We're all 15, so our parents are still driving us to the gigs in their minivans with our equipment loaded in the trunk. And we walk in before having played any show, and we decided we needed merch. So we also pulled in money to go to Weisskamp or something and get T-shirts made with our logo, which I made on PC Paintbrush, and I thought it was kind of cool logo. And on the back, it's a Sagacity, Champaign-Urbana's hottest new rock band.
This is Champaign is Also a Band podcast. One songwriter, one song. I'm Sven, your host for a journey into the music of Champaign-Urbana. Recorded in the Blue Box studio with a songwriter from the Champaign-Urbana music scene, past or present. Champaign is Also a Band podcast is a member of the Champaign Showers Podcast Network. Welcome to Champaign is Also a Band podcast. Today I have Mike Carpenter of the band Decadents, and you may know Mike from such bands as, I forgot to ask you, is it Sagacity?
So it's Sagacity. I don't know if many people remember that.
But it's all right. It's neat to have it as part of like the background, which was like your first band in high school, and you played the drums.
We're padding the resume a bit, let's be honest. Sagacity from in high school, and then there's a few others.
And then there's Maid.
Yeah.
And Civilian. Which sounds like that was a band that kind of led you into Decadents.
It did. Full disclosure about Civilian is we sort of copped that name. I read a Wikipedia entry about Audioslave.
Oh.
And they were between Audioslave and Civilian. And I thought, that's a cool name, and they didn't take it. So, and that was sort of the precursor, because there were a couple originals from that band we brought into Decadents early on.
Oh.
And it was the first time that I'd ever gotten from behind the drum kit and out towards the front to sing and play guitar.
Yeah. So, and now we're in the present with Decadents and Mojo, which is a Tom Petty tribute band.
Yeah, and that was an offspring of a Decadents great cover-up where we brought in our drummer Ben Donaldson's dad, Tim Donaldson, on guitar, and then Roger Perlman, who's been playing keys forever. I don't know if you know Captain Rat and the Blind Rivets.
They're
just a local institution, so that's Roger's band. And we did one great cover-up 2 years ago with that, and it was just a sort of seamless transition into, okay, the thing that I used to sort of not make fun of but always be leery about tribute bands is, well, why don't they do an original thing? But then you play in original bands enough and you realize that, well, it is kind of fun playing in front of a lot of people.
Right.
And when they know every word. So, yes. But it's been a lot of fun, so we still do that too.
Welcome to the show.
Hey, well, thank you for having me.
So today we're going to be listening to the song I'd Rather Be Lonely off of the album Elegantly Wasted, which is going to be reissued. It's been remastered, is that correct?
Yeah, this has been something that over the last few years, just with some idle time, going back to some of the old recordings, having learned a few tricks from other mixes I've done, and I went back with this album in particular, and I think finally got a mix that I'm proud of, that I think really captures the four of us in a room together. So this is part of the reissue that will be coming out in mid-March.
Excellent. And without further ado, here's the song. Welcome back. Mike, my favorite question that I always like to ask first is, what came first, the music or the lyrics?
That song or any other I've ever done, music. Always.
Oh, really? Okay.
And I was actually thinking about that because having listened to some of your podcasts before, I knew that question would come up. And for me, the bands that were formative for me, like Zepplin, I mean, that's the end all be all for me pretty much. But what struck me early on with him was the music, and then the vocals and more the tone and just how he sounded than the lyrics, because, Ramble On, it's Hobbit imagery, which is cool, but it's more about the way that he sings it. So that tends to grab me more. And often we'll be rehearsing something and I'll just go with syllables and a melody and then kind of figure it out later. And a case in point would be another song of ours called You and Yourself, where I was just kind of singing gibberish, and a friend said, well, did you say You and Yourself? I said, no, but that sounds like a good title, so let's go with that. But I'd Rather Be Lonely came together fairly quickly, and it was one of those things, too, that when we came up with those 4 words, I did a Google search thinking there's got to be a song with that title. It felt too obvious, almost. And I didn't spot anything too recognizable. Nothing really popped up on the first search, so I thought, okay, we'll go with it. But I like the simplicity of it, too. All that said, though, it was the music that really sort of propelled the lyrics and really the attitude of the lyrics, because we played it early on with the same amount of energy that came across in that recording. So that, I hope, was captured in the words that I chose.
What actually came first in the writing process? Was there just a riff that you were doing, or it was like...
Yeah, so it was the and it was that little twist from the D-E-E, the D-E-E, that's simple enough, everyone does that, the G-A-A, of course, but it was that A, B flat, A, G, A, G, E. It was that B flat instead of going up to the B, where I thought that added a cool little twist at the end to keep it from becoming too, I don't know if repetitive is the right word, because I do like repetitive, but I just to give it enough of a twist where it wasn't too formulaic or anything.
I think also when you're doing that kind of a scale right there, you're generating what you could say is like a G blues scale, right? A little bit, so you're pulling that in. The intro on this, there's this really kind of cool play between all of the instruments, but they're all kind of trying to join one voice, but they also have their own...
All trying to converge at one point, right? So you have the guitar coming in first, and it's a single guitar with down, da-dun, da-dun, da-dun. Then they go stereo as the second guitar comes in, and then the bass and drums come in with that same chugga-chugga sort of thing. But the idea is, I think it's right about the 50-second mark when they all converge finally with the main riff. And what I wanted with that build-up, and I think we captured okay, is a sort of release. Not that we write for driving music. There's some bands that are perfect for driving, and from a hard rock perspective, I always go back to Queens of the Stone Age, and a lot of their stuff is just perfect driving music. But with this one, it felt like, okay, that moment where you finally get off of the on-ramp, and now you're on the interstate, and that's the moment where finally we all converge to the main, let's call it the main riff, which is, I feel like, release, opening, when everything else up to that point is very like, okay, you're building to something, it's make it count,
It's interesting to me that you kind of built this whole song off of those 4 words, and then that was the impetus for how you wrote the rest of your lyrics, right?
Yeah.
Is that what you're... I mean...
Yes, absolutely. So like the lyrics, for example, the verses are "can't feel it away," which, what does that necessarily mean? Again, that goes back to the idea that when we were rehearsing it and working through, it was always the melody and it was syllables. And for the most part, it was probably just da 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 da. I knew something had to fit in that. Usually with lyrics, for me... And this is sort of from the school of Tom Petty. And this is before the Tom Petty tribute thing. But what I've grown to appreciate about Tom Petty stuff is that there is this sort of general, I don't know, I don't want to say vague, because that makes it sound like they aren't directed at something. But they're open-ended enough where people could take it and relate it to whatever experiences they have. So for "can't feel it away," well, what are you trying to feel away? All back to this idea, I'd rather be lonely, wanting to still maintain this sort of defiance. And, full disclosure, when we wrote this back in 2013, a lot of it is stemming from your early to mid-20s, let's say, failed relationships and all. I mean, in rock and roll, so much of it is based on that.
Right.
You know, and there was nothing wrong with that. But I did like the sort of the FU quality of I'd rather just be alone than with you, and then just letting the verses sort of, I guess, more of the you can't shake it, right? You can't shake this. So ultimately, the chorus, the resolution is, well, you know what? Screw this. I'd just rather be lonely than that.
You're right. You can totally relate to this in your 20s, right? This to me is like quintessential 20s. You know, like,
absolutely.
You know,
late teens. For me, it was really
yeah.
Well, it's sort of that period when you go to college, and I think that there's this sort of anxiety of, all right, am I an adult? I don't feel like it. I still feel like a kid. And really, the responsibilities you have. I mean, I went to school here at the U of I. And at a place like that, you feel like such a small fish in a gigantic pond, but oftentimes in an overwhelming sort of way. Then you feel this pressure. It wasn't from my family. It wasn't from friends. Maybe it's social. I don't know. But you feel this pressure that, well, now I'm getting older, so I need to be able to begin and maintain some sort of relationship. Now, in hindsight, being 33, it's easy to look back at that and say, well, what did you expect? You know, when you're 18, 19, 20 years old, or even early 20s, post-college, and now you're really trying to be an adult, you don't have things figured out. No one does. So that is all that anxiety. It's the admission of failure, but then back to the idea of the chorus, it's sort of like, well, so what? And it is a little bit, to be honest, of, I don't want to say pushing the blame on the other party, but it's trying to get back any sort of self-confidence that you may have lost in the process, which we've all been through that, where you get out of something and you feel at that moment like the lowest of the low, and you're never going to find happiness or any of that, which sounds very sort of sappy and everything. Yeah. But that's where rock and roll at its best, I think, is this sort of, all right, you're good. Like, let's get going. Let's get that sort of mojo back into it. This is what was really cool about the creative process that we had during that album, and why I'm really proud of those 11 tracks. But the signature, or the most representative one, is probably I'd Rather Be Lonely. I felt like it was a very nice fusion of what the four of us could do musically, finding a very simple theme and going with it lyrically. I've always been a music before lyric kind of person, but that's not to say that there aren't lyrics that move me. And for me, the most important thing is, as long as the hook of that song can resonate, then mission accomplished. And that's not to say that verses can be filler. You don't want that, even though I've got plenty of filler in my lyrics, and I think most do. But it felt like there was this sort of, I'm not going to say I wrote it with like old bluesmen in mind, because that sounds so pretentious that
right. But
you still want to maintain the fact that, okay, we've all been down, and okay, what next? And the beauty of rock and roll, and with I think the intensity of the instrumental portion of that song, is that the idea of those lyrics and the delivery had to match that intensity. And out of all the songs we ever play live, that's the one that, wherever it's on the set list, we can't play it early, because it feels like, you know, at that point, well, where do we go? We got to, you know, you can't reach that same sort of climax that you do in that song. But yeah, that I think was the main idea with it.
Decadents was formed in 2010. I feel like you've had enough of that experience of performing live. How do you pick your set list? What goes through your mind as you're putting that together? Because I'm like imagining, you want to start off with something that people would know, kind of get them in.
Yeah, right.
And then let's do something new. And then, I don't know, like at least leave them with a bang kind of thing. I don't know. I'm curious on your thoughts of that.
I've always been a stickler for it with set list, and it's, you know, you're writing a mixtape. I mean, you can't continue to pummel like the first 6-7 songs and go with high intensity and not have an ultimate, you know, bring it back. Because if you're going to play a 2-hour show, and in general, what Decadents will do is a 90-minute to 2-hour set, which is totally doable. I prefer that single set to the set break. I feel like so much momentum is lost. So you'll go to a bar, early gigs, we'd schedule, and they'd say, well, we need you from 9 to midnight. And I'm like, well, we aren't Bruce Springsteen of the E Street Band, and we don't want to take a set break. So how about we just play, I don't know, 9:30 to 11:30? And they're like, right. No, we need 9 to midnight. So it's sometimes you acquiesce. But with the set list, it does feel like you want to get them early with high energy to start, and then maybe, let's say, 4th, 5th song in, you play something a little more mid-tempo. Like, I think you need to fluctuate, though, because if you pack too many songs of the same kind around each other, then, especially if they aren't familiar with your music, it starts to sound sort of homogenous and easy to lose them at that point. Typically, you start with a song that everybody knows, you end with the signature song.
I do feel like you can never know exactly what to expect from a crowd, and some venues are different than others, and different towns are different than others.
Yeah.
And I'd like to say that Champaign-Urbana is a good audience, but I don't always see them as a super enthusiastic audience all the time.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
I feel like they're super appreciative, and no shade on anybody, but yeah, I do sometimes feel like the audience doesn't give back as much as an audience member.
There'd be shows that we would play, and afterwards I'd ask, my wife, hey, I mean, was the crowd into it? I couldn't tell from on stage. She's like, oh yeah, I mean, they were totally like listening and into it. But if there's not motion, because usually, especially on stage, you are kind of zeroed in on your surroundings. And I'm one of those singers that when I'm actually singing, my eyes are closed. It's not I have anxiety or anything, they just are. And I don't take enough opportunities to actually look out and see what's going on. And if that moment that I do look out there, I see people just sort of looking.
Yeah.
And then now the other side of it would be, well, what would I expect them to do? Especially if it's a venue and they're sitting at a table. I mean, how much can you shimmy in your seat to make it look like, man, that person's really into it?
Yeah, right.
So the expectations as a performer, you want just madhouse crazy all the time, but there is a realization that sometimes it is just a listening audience. I find the same thing where I'll go to concerts. An example being George Thorogood came to Virginia, and we decided, what the hell, we'll go see George Thorogood. And it was a really good show. I was impressed with it. But it is an older audience, so he's rocking out, and we're sitting down. And I'm like, well, this doesn't feel right. Actually, another case to that was, you talk about local audiences, Champaign-Urbana. Tom Petty came to State Farm Center. We had great seats, and I'm like, I'm not the world's biggest Tom Petty fan, but this is pretty cool. Joe Walsh opens up, great opening set. We're ready for Tom Petty. Unbelievable live performance, and our section for the entire show until the inevitable American Girl closer, we're sitting. And there's so many variables, and a big one is crowd. And if the crowd is not into it, and you feel like, well, do I got to bring it down? Is my temperature too hot right now? Do I need to bring it back down to not fit in, but you also don't want to be the guy that's the obnoxious one as everyone around you is just trying to enjoy a nice evening out, It's like everybody at concerts, and locally especially, they are looking for cues as, well, how can I act here? How into it can I get?
Right.
I understand it, but and that's just a social thing too. But there have been other instances, and this is where it's a shame. I think that Cowboy Monkey, for example, isn't around anymore, because it did feel like as a band we were able to get momentum there enough where we would play our sets from 9 to 11 on Friday nights every 3 months, and it was with somewhat regular. And there were enough people that would be regulars for those shows that they knew, well, let's go up and at least for half of it get into it. So it's still chasing that as a performer, just like I do when I'm a spectator and I'm trying to get the same experience only in the crowd, and hoping that those in my section or those on the floor, the pit with me, are as into it as I am.
We went on a little bit of a tangent. I'd love to come back to the song for just a little bit. So how did you bring this song to the rest of the band? Was it complete, or did you kind of let everyone kind of flesh it out?
I would say that song and most songs that we've done are usually, I'll bring the skeleton of the song in. I think what would have happened, and we used to rehearse in my basement before we got a dog, and she's a corgi, she can't handle it, so we
I could totally see that.
Yeah. Oh, I know. It was so sad. And then there is a great warehouse space that Tim Donaldson lets us use for that, for both Mojo and Decadents. And it is nice. I also like having to travel somewhere to rehearse, because then you feel like you're actually like on the clock. And you need to make the most of it. Where if we were at our house, it'd be like, hey, let's go watch The Simpsons upstairs, which is great. But for focus issues, it's nice to have a spot.
Yes.
All that, another tangent there. But would have brought the skeleton to the band. And what we usually do is just, okay, Ben Donaldson on the drums. Well, what do you think would sound good here? If I were to have recorded a demo with everything from drums to bass to guitar, there's no way that I would have come up with that drum part. There's no way that I would have come up with the second guitar part, which is that sort of higher, more brash guitar that Mike Solomon brings in. That comes in, I'm pretty sure, about 30 seconds in. What's really cool about Alan on the bass is that he is a guitar player. I like when basses are played with a pick. I know that sometimes purists may say that you shouldn't do that or whatever, but for our purposes, it's actually good because it just adds one more layer of, I think, directness. It's not particularly complicated, but what we have figured out is that our best songs are where the four of us are each doing something, and we pick the spot in which we all come in unison. And typically, that's the main riff or the chorus riff, is when we will come into unison. But it's sort of like in the verses or in an instrumental intro, that's where you need to let each person sort of bring whatever flavor they have into it and then ultimately coalesce. I think that's a good term for that moment in the chorus. That part, I could have pointed out to each guy and said, hey, the chorus needs to sound like this.
Yeah.
But if I would have said the same for the verse or the instrumental intro, it would have been a far more, let's just call it boring song. So that's where especially Ben Donaldson on the drums is the engine that sort of keeps that thing going. We figured out when we recorded it and throughout all the years that, okay, well, these are our strengths. And I think that's one other point too, is that I never try to play like some face melting guitar solo because I can't. And when you know your limitations, I think, and all four of us do, that lends itself well to a song like this. And you know that, well, don't do too much, just do whatever serves the song.
So is that you doing the guitar solo?
No, that's Mike Solomon. And what's cool is that if you listen to that album in total, I think we each have, there's 11 tracks and basically split guitar solos on it. There are a few that will come to shows and they're like, man, we listen to your album every Friday night. Oh, Mike S's guitar solo on that song was really cool, where they could pick up the stylistic difference. I am one that needs to write out a solo. And he's one that just kind of feels it as he plays it.
Does that mean that there's a heavy variation with his solos, or do you? I'm just saying, do you know what to expect when you're playing live?
No. There are, let's say, the beginning of that solo is down, 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 down. That was something where we went through maybe 2 or 3 takes at the studio. And I think all I said was, that's good. Start with that and then go wherever. And same thing live, where he will start with and then whatever. So
Gotcha.
That's where the uniformity, it just kind of goes away. And he is a much more spontaneous player. And listening, there's a live album we just put out through distribution as well from 2017. And the solo is the same for the first 4 bars, and then he goes off in a completely different thing.
I kind of get the sense that for Decadents, structure is very, very important. In your particular genre of hard rock, I feel like that's a very strong... There's like a need to have the verse, chorus, verse, and having, a bridge and then a solo section. And then does that ever feel like that binds you, or it kind of frees you?
That's a great question. I don't want to cop out and say both are true to an extent. There was about a 3-4 year period before we're going to go in the studio again for a 4th album here. And in those intervening 3-4 years, it felt like I was constricted by that. Then ultimately realizing, and I think in a weird way, the Tom Petty tribute side thing, when you have to go through someone else's catalog and realize that there's so much structure with what they do. So an example of that would be, let's go with Free Fallin' as one example.
Right.
There's no second riff. I mean, it's the same thing. The only difference is that the chorus is just he's singing Free Fallin', and then the verses but the guitar is persistent throughout. There are no additional chord changes. There's no bridge.
Right.
And I think when we were going through that catalog, and even like I Won't Back Down, like the whole Full Moon Fever album is ridiculously simple, but therein lies... I mentioned how we need to know our limitations. We can't play a Mars Volta track. But we can play the occasional Zepplin track if we find a simple enough one. And then I think that just fosters this idea that structure's okay. Structure can be beneficial because it does keep you... It's some guardrails that you can use. But within those guardrails, that is where I think the creativity can come in. How do you take like an old trope and make it your own? How can you take... ideas that have been done, make it original and not derivative. And to me, those are sort of like creative choices that within the guardrails of a verse and then a chorus, a verse, chorus, and the bridge after the second chorus, right? You don't need to follow that structure every time, but it is sort of, I'm trying to think of maybe a metaphor for it without sounding, and to that point as well, with a 4-piece band, we don't really jam, so we don't have any songs that we stretch out live. That wouldn't be in our nature. So I think that from the outset, early on, it was, we're just going to be a rock band and nothing more, nothing less, right? And hopefully we get good at being a rock band and then people enjoy listening to us, whatever. But I think that knowing not just our limitations in terms of songwriting, but in terms of performance. So because there isn't a song that we can take a guitar solo that's 30 seconds on the record and then stretch it out to 2 minutes without it becoming boring live, it's like, well, let's just stick with the 4.5 minute song, the 4.5 minute. And occasionally, we will write something that it's like, oh, that's different. But usually it's more, the differences are in stylistic or maybe like genre exercises. Like, well, we want to kind of try a Southern rock, flavor, but it's still going to have that, verse chorus kind of structure. So yes, there was about a 3-4 year period where it was like, okay, well, I feel like I'm maybe writing the same stuff over and over. And that might be a problem. Well, it would be a problem if that's the case. But I think then you realize that those guardrails are not constraints all the time if you can find variation within it.
Do you have a particular favorite line?
Well, it's not the quintessential line in the song, and it was added at the end of the second verse, and I thought it was kind of like clever wordplay, and it may or may not be. I don't know. At the time, I was kind of proud of it. Was faith in nothing, after all, is faith all the same. And it's not some sort of like, agnostic, atheist anthem, right? But I did think that, back to the like mid-20s sort of thing, or early mid-20s, where you become, I think, naturally skeptical about things. And for some reason, I felt it appropriate to throw that line in there, because if you get into a point in life where this song's about, for the most part, a relationship that didn't work out, and then the verses are a little bit why didn't it work out, and the chorus is like, screw it, whatever. So for that second verse to end like that, I sort of wrapped other things that I felt had failed. This is going to sound very selfish, but other things that I felt had either failed me or that I had been told, hey, this is what it is. And then you get older and you're like, well, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. The skepticism of not just relationships, but just sort of everything that you just kind of assumed. And with that line, what I do like about it is it could be interpreted a few different ways if anyone ever wanted to parse it. But I thought, okay, faith in nothing, after all, is faith all the same. Meaning that people, whether it be religious faith or whether it be just a belief system of some sort, that, you could not have faith in someone else's belief system, but still have faith in whatever yours may be. I don't know. I felt like that was a cool little twist of that idea. When I try to explain it just there, I probably stumbled into the dangerous trap, though, of writing lyrics and trying to be clever and instead writing something that could end with, just fall with a thud. But it just felt like, I don't know why I threw that in there necessarily, but I felt that it applied even to that. I don't know. Maybe in hindsight, I would try to keep it more streamlined to what the song was about. But again, I don't want anything to ever become too literal and just be, this is a sad breakup song. Well, right. I want to throw something in there where maybe if someone were to read the lyrics, they could say, well, I guess it doesn't need to be about that.
What made this song be the one that you wanted to select as your favorite song to talk about?
One would be just, I think the instrumental performance is strong. When we got done with that take in the studio, and you got to wait for 10 seconds or whatever until there's dead silence. You gotta wait until the last cymbal fades, and usually that crash or ride, even if you mute it, you gotta give it time. And we're all looking at each other with this sort of, and even I'm holding my guitar and I'm like, don't accidentally hit that just scrape the strings or whatever. And when it faded, we were like, okay, that's good. And that whole recording thing we did in one 8-hour session with Ryan Groff at Perennial up in Champaign. And that one in particular, we knew that's going to be track 2, and we feel like that's sort of the first track is sort of like ease people into it, and then track 2, we wanted that to be the one that really hit. So when we hit that the way that we did, it was like, okay, well, that loosened us up for the rest of the day too, where we could be as efficient as we were, because we thought if we get through I'd Rather Be Lonely, everything else will just kind of come naturally. And it did. So it really set the tone for that day. And I think instrumentally is the reason I picked that, because it felt like the four of us were on when we did that. And the only overdub on that thing is the guitar solo.
Okay.
Well, sorry, guitar solo, and there's a second rhythm part, but I have 2 rhythm guitar tracks on each one. But rhythm guitar, 2 solo, and then 1 vocal. So, and again, it came together very quick. So this was our technically second album. And the first album's hard to listen to sometimes because we were such a young band and everything. I feel like bands, especially early on, you're just derivative. And eventually you find a way to take those influences and, you're like a sponge. You soak them in. And at first it comes out just like it came in, but eventually you do have your own twist to it. And this album in particular, it felt like we weren't trying to sound like anybody. Finally, we were us. Out of everything we've done, that album most encapsulates what we did best, I feel like. And it was also an arrival moment for me as a musician where the first album we did, and it was 12 tracks, and some of them hold up, some of them really don't. But this one, we went in thinking, we got 11 songs, we really like these, and all it takes now is actually just playing them and playing them well. And it's amazing the difference a venue can make, and in this case, a recording studio, where if you don't have anything to feed off of in terms of energy, you have to kind of create it yourself. And we start playing, and it's, most like any studio space, it's very dry. For the most part, it's just very, wow, every little thing I'm playing, any mistake is only accentuated, even knowing that you can go back and fix it later.
Right.
And that is the beauty of digital stuff. But that just felt like, okay, take a deep breath. You guys are okay. You can make a decent album here. You can make a decent rock album, and hopefully some people enjoy it.
Champagne is Also a Band podcast is proud to support Exile on Main Street. Exile on Main Street, located in the old train station building at 100 North Chestnut Street in downtown Champaign, has been helping to build record collections since 2004. Carrying a wide array of new and used LPs, CDs, and video games. Exile on Main Street has something for just about any music enthusiast and old-school gaming devotee. Exile also hosts regular free live music shows on its stage, so be sure to check out their Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter pages for the up-to-date details on the next upcoming event. Open 7 days a week, they can be reached by phone at 217-398-MAIN. That's 217-398-6246. Mike, tell me a little bit about like the Champaign-Urbana music scene. Like, you've been playing out in the scene for how long?
The first gig we ever played, if this qualifies as music scene, was at Channing Murray Foundation.
Oh, yeah.
In 2003, which I always thought was a great room.
Yes. You're talking upstairs?
Upstairs, the old church kind of room. Great room.
It's big enough to hold enough people, but it's tiny enough to be like intimate.
Yes, exactly. And for us in high schools, that's still an age where you basically just get your friends and hope that they bring a few of their friends, and you had to actually rent out the space. So I think we all even went to our parents like, hey, we need $75 and a $10 deposit to rent the space, and then we would do this 3 bands, $3.
Nice.
And the first gig we ever did was Sagacity and Deck 16 and Missing the Point. And Missing the Point, actually, they went on to have a little bit of regional success, and they were very much in the pop punk kind of vein. But those guys are still around. Steve Meadows is a local musician, great musician. And we walk in to that first gig. We're all 15, so our parents are still driving us to the gigs in their minivans with our equipment loaded in the trunk.
I love it.
And we walk in before having played any show, and we decided we needed merch. So we also pulled in money to go to Weiss Camp or something and get T-shirts made with our logo, which I made on PC paintbrush, and I thought it was kind of cool logo. And on the back, it's a Sagacity, Champaign-Urbana's hottest new rock band. So we walk into the venue all wearing our T-shirts, and the guys from Deck 16 and Missing the Point were probably thinking, you little asshole, And we're like, I mean, we were, unbeknownst to us, we looked like total jerks, But Channing Murray Foundation, we probably played mostly through high school, and then we rent out like McKinley Foundation. They had a basement that we rent out, but it wasn't probably until college where we did a couple Canopy Club shows. And for us, that was a big deal because I knew that they would get the occasional regional or even national act in there. But the problem with Canopy Club at that point especially was that if we wanted to play in the big room, but in order to play in the big room, you needed like 100 people if it was going to even feel successful.
Yes. Yeah.
Like, I would rather play in the Void Room, I think that's what or the Red Room, whatever they call it, at Canopy, because that can turn into an intimate spot like that. But if you want to play in the theater, you better make sure you're like we opened for Zoso one time as Decadents, and which I thought, I'm kind of opening for Zepplin, this is cool. And that was great because there were enough people where it didn't feel like this big, empty former movie theater, which is what it is. But yeah, so it would have been, I think, I'm 33, so I've been in band since 15. I guess the music scene, the scene was probably in college back in 2005. And we've, in some way or another, been active in it. And this is a really weird point that we're at here in 2020 because, I was talking to you off air beforehand, in trying to decide if we were going to get Decadents back up and running again. One thing that I was sort of about was, where are we going to play? And it used to be that there were enough venues in town that every couple months you can say, well, in March, I'm going to play Cowboy Monkey. And then in May, we'll do a Memphis on Main gig. We'll circle back over to Urbana in August and then come back to Cowboy Monkey in October. And not exhaust your options in town. Now there's just not a lot of options. So you have to say, well, I guess we'll do 3 this year. I don't know, and where?
Yeah.
And that's sort of a problem we're running into as a louder rock band, because we did Iron Post back in the day because it was the only place that would have us. Kudos to Paul and the people over there for actually letting us come in, but it was so loud and it's uncomfortable, and that's why you need a little bit larger of a room, and there's just not a lot of options for that right now.
Canopy and now the City Center are large enough, I would say.
And City Center is great, but I mean, I couldn't take Decadents there. We aren't going to draw well enough for that. But with the Tom Petty Band, we did one show there, and it turned out pretty good. But even with the 100 people or whatever we brought out, that's a big room. So you're looking out, it's like, I think this is a good draw, but I can't tell. Whereas Cowboy Monkey back in the day, you get 40, 50 people, and it's still a fun time, and it feels like a vibrant performance.
And like Memphis on Main, also that had that same kind of
that was
long
a fun room.
Bar kind of feel to it. You get that with Blackbird for sure.
Mm-hmm. Or even like Mike and Molly's Beer Garden. And I know, fortunately, Seven Saints Beer Garden, they will do the occasional show. Poor Brothers, we got a gig coming up there this summer, and that's, again, just kind of like a long beer garden, but it works out well because you got an elevated stage area, and on a nice summer night, that does just fine. So I think ultimately it just feels like we are in a valley, so to speak, of the local music scene, because there's the venues are limited, and I don't know... I feel like this trend started maybe a decade ago, and I'm going to sound like old man yelling at cloud here, but electronic music for college kids, that's where it's at, and it's only continued to go that direction. So you can kind of take the campus market and say, well, that ain't happening. Okay, so you move that aside. Well, what about downtown Champaign? Okay, well, there's Neal Street Blues, and that's a cool little spot. Clark Bar is great for more acoustic-based shows. City Center's big, apart from that. And then you go to Urbana, and fortunately, you do have a Blackbird. You still got Iron Post, Rose Bowl. And that's a cool spot, and that's one to look at. But it just feels like for a market that has like 130,000. I mean, significant population, and we're struggling to have a live music scene, because it used to be in downtown Champaign. You go there on a Friday or Saturday night in the summer, especially, and you had 4 or 5 options. All within walking distance. You could hit up to even 3 shows if you wanted to. It's frustrating nonetheless, though, and that was the case 10 years ago. It's the case now, in that if you want to be in a band, you need to decide one of 2 paths. It can either be a hobby that you enjoy, or you can decide that you're going to live out the struggle. And for me, I love my creature comforts, and I'm a homebody, so it's like, well, I need my day gig, and this will be my night gig.
Right.
And irregularly so. Even at our peak, Decadents was playing maybe 3 out of 4 weekends a month at our maybe, but more like 1 gig a month. And that was what we were comfortable with. And we decided we're going to live other lives than that.
And you didn't tour as well. Or you might have made the occasional day trip out to St. Louis or
we
Chicago.
We did the Elbow Room in Chicago a few times. And it was great, because the one thing about the Elbow Room is it was easy for our Chicago friends to get to, for one. So we could get, 40 or 50 people. especially post-college when everyone moved back home, it's like, hey, I haven't seen you in a while. How about you come to the Elbow Room? But also what was great about that is we're bringing I'm driving my Honda Accord up there. Well, the Elbow Room, they had a backline already. And they had a drum set, and they had Marshall stacks and all that. So all you had to bring was your guitar. And I was like, how convenient is that? But we never played indie. Not that indie's, I don't know how much of a market that is. We never did St. Louis. It was really just Elbow Room was our Chicago gig. And we did the Cubby Bear once, and that turned out okay. But yeah, the thing of touring would have been, okay, well, the minute I would even broach that thought is, well, what about this? And what about that? All these well, who's going to mow the yard, just all these things that are, and then it's like, well, maybe the whole touring rock star thing isn't in the cards if I'm even thinking about that kind of stuff.
Right. But speaking of side gigs, you are also a member of the Champagne Showers Podcast Network with your podcast, The 200 Level.
The music thing was a hobby, passion, whatever you want to call it, and always will be. So fortunately, that can maintain a space in my life no matter what else I'm doing. I was on radio for about a decade after college up through last year when I became a teacher full-time. And then the radio gig ended, it would have been last summer, through circumstances that were a little bit out of my control and disappointing at the time. But this is such an old cliche, and I didn't necessarily believe this at the time, but one door closes, another door opens. But what's beautiful about podcasting, which I was an avid consumer of them anyways, but I love being able to do it on my own time. It's in my basement. I can just pop down there when I'm feeling the, inspiration or whatever. In addition to music, sports have always been a part of my life, and this community, Illinois basketball, has always been a big part of my life. Football's always sucked, so whatever. We get used to it. But it is fun to do that, to scratch that itch and be able to do that on your own accord and not have because I will say that when things were bad with Illinois sports, which the last decade they mostly have been, to get on there every day, you eventually, and what we decided to turn it into was, we're just going to hang out with friends. And we just happen to be talking about sports. And that's what you kind of had to do. Otherwise, you'd go nuts with it. But with this, it's, once a week, a couple hours, and sort of like what you do. I mean, you get a nice space going. It becomes a place that you can go and just be creative for a bit and then go back upstairs and watch a little TV and just whatever. I mean, to me, I do like that freedom with it.
Well, so in a certain sense, though, this won't obviously upset your corgi, but it also, it's in your house. So it's not like you feel like you mentioned earlier that you would have a rehearsal space where it felt good to be able to kind of go and clock in. So do you feel like this is more like that passion?
Yeah, totally. I mean, usually it's like, here, Rosie, her name's Rosie, for Rosalita, for the Springsteen song. Here's Ringbone, go off and do your thing. And she's occupied for the next hour. And I can just go down there and riff. And with the solo podcast, the most of what I'll do is I'll maybe write a few notes. And then if I reach the end of a point, maybe I'll pause it, take a quick drink, kind of regroup, and then think, okay, what am I going to say next? And try to self-edit as I'm doing it. But for the most part, I don't record and then go back and then take out little bits. I will pause myself and then delete that last 5 seconds if I didn't like it, but then just try to press on and then mix it down from there. But the cool thing with it, especially the way that podcasting has gone, there's an immediacy to it. So when something does happen, I can immediately go down and respond to it. Right. So an example of that would have been last week after the Illinois-Michigan State game where Io looked to blow out his knee.
Yeah.
Right. Go down to record a podcast, and 30 minutes into it, I get a text message saying, hey, there's no structural damage. And I hit Control-A. I delete those 30 minutes. I'm like, well, okay, got to redo this, because I was essentially, lamenting the end of the season, and then all of a sudden I'm like, well, okay, this is an entirely different thing. But
I didn't realize that had happened. No, I mean, I knew about that. IO was better, but I didn't and I saw that you had posted an episode about that, but I didn't realize that you had already recorded about 30 minutes and then just said, forget it.
I was at 35 minutes and trying to rationalize the loss of the best player and say, well, we still got a chance here. And I knew I was just talking myself into it. I didn't even feel comfortable as I was talking about it thinking, do you really believe what you're saying right now? Or is that the fan trying to, be optimistic? I got that text and I was like, okay, easy decision here. And then I just deleted those 35 minutes and said, okay, let's start over again.
Do you find that Illinois fans are an awful lot like Cubs fans? Like, it's
tortured?
Yeah, tortured, but always, well, there's always next season, or this was a building year.
Yeah, a little bit. I'm thinking that with Illinois football, that's where the Cubs thing comes in. Yeah. And really, actually, Illinois football is far more hapless than the Cubs historically. I mean, the Cubs, I know that they got made fun of, and for good reason, but for the most part, probably more respectable history on the field than Illinois football. With Illinois basketball, it is something where they've been so close. I mean, they've been right there for extended periods of time, and I know what it's like here during a winter when they are good. And to me, it makes winter go that much quicker when I know every 2-3 nights a week I have an Illinois basketball game to look forward to. And then I have an NCAA tournament to look forward to, too.
Right.
Feels like this year it will still end up with that. I mean, by the time people listen to this, I may have dated myself and Illinois misses out on Selection Sunday. Who knows?
Oh, well.
But for me, it was two things growing up. Now, I couldn't play sports. So it simply was a matter of talking about it. I could at least do something with music and create something. So for the sports angle, it wasn't, well, I'm going to scratch that itch by going out on the court or trying out for the team. I did one tryout for 7th grade basketball, and I went home that night and I just told my dad, it's not in the cards. Like, let's be real. I'm not good. And he understood, and he wasn't like, all right, come on, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. It was an acknowledgement that, it's not for everybody, and that's fine. But I still love it. I still love watching it and talking about it.
Champagne is Also a Band podcast is proud to support Jubilee Cafe. Jubilee Cafe is a free weekly meal program at Community United Church of Christ, 805 South 6th Street in Champaign, Illinois. Jubilee Cafe serves a home-cooked meal from 5 to 6:30 each Monday. Their mission is to feed hungry people by cooking healthy, delicious meals and by serving their guests restaurant-style with servers waiting on tables. Jubilee Cafe is open to anyone who cares to eat with them. Because food insecurity among students is so high, they serve students as well as others in and around the Champaign-Urbana community who struggle with hunger. Meals are free to all and will be served each Monday evening. Located in the accessible lower level of the building at 6th and Daniel Streets in Champaign. For more information on the meal or how to volunteer, go to the Jubilee Cafe CUCC Facebook page or email them at jubilee.cafe@community-ucc.org. That's jubilee.cafe@community-ucc.org. Mike, what is your favorite non-musical thing?
Favorite non-musical thing? I mean, I mentioned the sports thing with podcasting, but if you told me all of a sudden you're going to wake up tomorrow and sports don't exist, I'd be fine. I'd find other things to do. And honestly, probably save myself a lot of headaches in the process, because it's ridiculous how even at 33, I noticed that the last decade of Illinois sports, they were so bad, I wasn't emotionally invested. So I felt like, I'm becoming a mature fan. And then I went to a game a week ago when they were in the thick of the Big Ten race.
Right.
And I'm just like full-throated meatball fan. And I'm like, what happened to me? I'm just like I was when I was 18 years old. I didn't grow at all. I'm the same person. But sports go away tomorrow. That's fine. We, off mic, had a brief conversation about movies. And I think for me, from a young age, it was like the first time that I watched a Hitchcock movie and realized that there were more than just like Jurassic Park. And I love Jurassic Park, don't get me wrong, great movie. But I think the first time I saw Vertigo, and I thought, well, I'm 8 and I don't understand this, but there's something going on here. And like with great music, the first time I heard Stairway to Heaven, as cliche as it sounds, it didn't grab me right away, but about 5 minutes after it ended, I was like, I need to rewind the cassette tape. I need to listen to that again. I'm intrigued. And at age 8, you don't know what intrigued means, but you just are, because of an emotion or a feeling. So I would say maybe movies, that's something that my wife and I will binge watch TV shows, and they're super high quality nowadays and often as good as any movie that you could see. But there is something about the experience of going to a movie theater for an anticipated movie. And one moment in my life, this just happened last year at the Virginia Theater, was they had the 50th anniversary of 2001, the original print.
Oh.
And the way they were billing it was unremastered. So it's got all the cracks and everything in it too. And it was a Saturday afternoon, 2:00, whatever. No one really in the theater, maybe 25 people. And I just plant myself third row center, just right in front of that gigantic screen, and was reminded, like, this is, to me, as close of a feeling as you could get to going to a great concert, where you know you're about to experience something. So for me, I would say probably movies would be second. And I feel like if you gave me the tools that, I can use Acid Pro or something and record an album, even if it's somewhat amateur quality, right? I can do that.
Yeah.
But if there was such a thing to do with filmmaking, that'd be great to be able to just pick up a camera and then just kind of make your own film. The only difference is that with a band, you only need 4 people to even do a, low budget film. You need like 100. It's a whole thing, right? So I don't know how I would ever find my avenue into that, but for now I just enjoy watching and experiencing them. Like, it's one of those things that you watch it and you know what it is, but if someone said, okay, now go do it. And music always felt like something that, because I started piano lessons when I was 3 or 4, I think. Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star and all that.
Yeah.
And, for the first few years, I didn't like it. It just felt like, piano lessons, fine. Every Tuesday, it's after school, whatever. And then eventually you get over that hump and you start enjoying it. And then realize that, I can do this. But with filmmaking, it seems like, and I know that most of them started with like a Super 8 camera or something. Like the greats start with this very kind of low budget thing. But, again, back to that idea that you need to now get people that can be in front of the camera. And then, you probably need a boom mic. Okay, crap, I got to buy a boom mic now. Oh, you probably need this, probably need that. And I know the same thing goes for music to an extent. But really, 4-piece rock band, it's like, okay, I got an amp and guitar. The guitarist has an amp and a guitar. Bass player's got a bass amp and a bass. And the drummer's got his drums. Okay, we're good to go. Oh, wait, we need a PA. And then you're done. So there is that much more, the do-it-yourself thing, I think, comes far easier for music than it would for putting anything on a camera.
I mean, do you have a favorite movie?
2001.
2001.
That reaffirmed it when I saw it. And
okay,
all these years later, because I rented it when I was 10 or 11. I love Summer Vacation. I mean, who doesn't? And part of the reason I probably went into teaching is knowing that I would get Summer Vacation for the rest of my life. It's great. And I don't get bored. Some people do, but I'm good. I'll find things to do. And we would go to Blockbuster. We would go and I'd rent a few movies for the week. Another cool thing that my parents would do, in addition, I mean, they come to like every gig. I mean, they're the most supportive parents you could ever ask for. But on Fridays, I would go with my mom or my dad to Blockbuster, and then they'd get me Taco Bell or something like that. So I get like 2 or 3 movies for the weekend. And what I would go through is these phases. So I go through a Hitchcock phase, and I get like a Hitchcock book so I could read about it after I watched it. Or I'd go through a James Bond movie phase, and then I get a James Bond movie book and read about those. But 2001 was the Summer Vacation, maybe like 5th or 6th grade, on small TV. This is pre-HD TVs and all that, by like 10 years. And still like, what the hell did I watch? Like at 10 a.m. in the morning, and still being really intrigued. And then the other movie I would put up there is a 1B. If 1A is 2001, 1B would be There Will Be Blood with Daniel Day-Lewis. And Paul Thomas Anderson's the director. He did Boogie Nights, which is another great movie, Magnolia. But that movie just draws me in, and it is very stylistically similar to Stanley Kubrick, 2001 director. So maybe that's why I like it.
Yeah.
The aesthetic of it.
I mean, I'm a fan of Stanley Kubrick.
And then, Scorsese. You watch Goodfellas and you're like, okay, I can watch that once a year. That's one of those once a year, gotta watch Goodfellas at some point. Same with Pulp Fiction. The rewatchability is really high. I mean, but that's the thing. The great thing about movies, and the reason I love talking about them, is sort of, if we talk music and you said, well, what's your favorite Zepplin album?
Right.
We could have a whole hour on, well, which one's your favorite?
Right.
And the subjectivity of it leads to these great discussions. And other friends of mine, one really didn't like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. And this running joke is that he thought that Little Women was a far better film. And I'm like, I know Little Women was probably great because Greta Gerwig's a great director. and I'm excited to see it myself, but there's no way it's better than one, so
Right.
it leads to those sort of passionate discussions that are always fun.
Mike, thank you so much for coming on the show. Thank you for talking about your song, I'd Rather Be Lonely, off of the soon-to-be reissued album, Elegantly Wasted, talking about the scene and your early high school moments of playing at the Channing Murray. And
Great venue.
I swear, do you happen to have a picture of that shirt? Because I would love to repost that.
I have the shirt. My parents have copies of the shirt. They have the flyers that I would take to high school and be like, hey, 3 bands, $3, Channing Murray Foundation.
And then sharing your favorite non-musical things. And I just look forward to many other years of you playing as Decadents and being a part of the music scene.
No, I appreciate you having me. I don't get to talk about music often. And I don't know if this was off the air or off the mic or on the mic, but the leeriness in talking about it is that I would consume, one example would be the making of Dark Side of the Moon. And I'm hearing Roger Waters and David Gilmour talking about it. And they're talking about a masterpiece. So whatever they say about it, it could be the most pretentious thing ever. And I'm like, yes, of course, that makes sense. Yeah. So then talking about your own music, which, I don't know about other people and how they create their work. Inspiration or whatever you want to call it is often sort of a non-verbal thing. You aren't thinking literally as you create something. You're just sort of doing it. At least that's what I feel like when these songs come up. So, or Keith Richards' example is that you're kind of a conduit and the songs just arrive like, out of the ether. Oh, there's a song. And it does feel like that sometimes. So in talking about it, hopefully I didn't come off, certainly not pretentious. I hope not. And acknowledging that, what we got, I'm really proud of what Decadents has done. I'm really proud of that album and excited that it will be out there in March in a far more sonically powerful version and not in sort of the, what was that whole thing, the mid-2000s, the brick wall, where they would just, everything was compressed to all hell just to be loud.
Right.
This is not that. It's got a good kind of sizzle to it that we didn't have before. So it's nice to get the band back together and be playing original gigs and be working on a new album this year, which we hope will be out in June or July.
Excellent.
And, wherever the scene's at now, there's still places to play. There's still people to come to shows. And I think that like any peak and valley, we'll get new venues, we'll get new voices. And it's still cool to know, especially after playing the great cover-up, that there are these institutions in town, like a Ward Gollings, who's been booking and promoting for decades now. It's still good to know that there is a scene and that the people behind it are, they have the best interest at heart. So it's just fun to be a part of it and fun to talk music.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much.
Appreciate it.
Awesome.
Thank you for listening to Champagne is Also a Band podcast. This is Mike Carpenter from Decadents reminding you great music is out there. Go find it where you live. Here's the dangerous thing too, is like I'm also one who consumes like the making of so-and-so album documentaries. Really? And you see these musicians and they're like, wow, that's a very thoughtful response. And it's like, oh shit, like what's my thoughtful response?
You almost have an NPR voice. It's so good.
South Peter on the inside.